Well, good evening, friends, and welcome to our Thursday night Association of Engaged Buddhists online Zoom Dharma get together. I'm Patricia McLaughlin. I've been a member with the association for a number of years. I don't always show up. Always show up on a Thursday night, but I'm very glad to be here tonight to introduce my friend Sue Toohey, who's going to be giving us our meditation and our Dharma talk tonight. Her topic is enlightened people or enlightened actions. And I must say, I really like the idea of it not being a place to arrive at and then sit quietly, but to keep on doing the things that give us that sense of working towards or maybe even achieving enlightenment. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'll also just say, and I won't give too much away, that I think I know the Zen saying that you referred to. And I'll let you know at the end of the evening if in fact I have the right one in mind. Just for those of you who may not know Sue, she has been a Buddhist meditator and a yoga practitioner and teacher for, I think, close to 40 years.
It would be about that, Patricia.
Yeah, and that's a really wonderful sort of pedigree for us. Sue was an early supporter and member of the Association of Engaged Buddhists when Bhante Tejadamo first returned from Thailand to Sydney in the early 1990s. And many of you might know her as a very experienced and accessible yoga and teacher of the Dharma. So I'm very glad to welcome Sue here tonight. Welcome you all to our sitting. Thank you, Meredith, for your sterling and ongoing work in making these Thursday nights possible. And look, I know people sometimes like to not put their camera on, but if you feel comfortable, I think if you'd like to switch your camera on, that would be nice. But obviously, I'll leave that up to you. So thank you, Meredith. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I'll hand over to Sue.
Thank you, Patricia. Thanks very much for the introduction. I'd like to start this evening with the little bit of chanting that we always used to do at Sangha Lodge. I have to confess that when we first started meeting together, I disliked chanting, and I said to Bhante once, I bloody hate chanting in Pali. But over the years, I have come to love it, and it's come to make me feel connected to other Buddhist groups all over the world. I've gotten better at Pali pronunciation, but far from perfect. And it also reminds me to be grateful to the monks, to the teachers who brought the teachings to Australia. Okay. So if you know the words, feel free to chant along with me. And if not, perhaps you just listen for a moment. So starting with the homage to the triple gem. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Namo
tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranang gacchami. Dhammam saranang gacchami. Sangham saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddham saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammam saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammam saranang gacchami. Tatyampi Buddham saranang gacchami. Tatyampi Dhammam saranang gacchami. Tatyampi Sangam Saranang Gacchami. So I'll leave it there. Once again, my voice has failed me in chanting. So I have to remind myself that this is the way it is. And we'll just go on from there. So would you like to have the meditation first tonight or the talk first? Meditation, you can put your hand up, or talk.
Meditation would be nice.
Let's try that again. Meditation and talk, or talk. It's a close thing. I think we'll go with, okay, we'll go with the meditation. So make yourself comfortable. And I thought tonight in the meditation, we would focus on a deep embodied breath awareness. So if we're inside the body, aware of the sensations in the body, we can't be lost in thinking at the same time. So coming inside the body deeply, in particular, being aware of movements associated with breathing deep inside the body, is a really good way to cut through habits of rumination and distraction and getting lost in thoughts. So begin by settling into your body, allowing yourself to relax into the position that you've chosen. And you can do this whether you're sitting in a chair or sitting on a cushion or lying down. Whatever's going to be most comfortable but enables you to stay awake and alert. And once you've chosen your position, just really giving your weight up to the surface that you're resting on. See if you can give the whole weight of your body up to gravity and rest down into the points of contact between the body and the surface that you're resting on. Just allow yourself to be fully supported. And then gradually gathering your awareness and taking it deeper inside the body, deep inside the belly. Resting inside the movement and the sensations of breathing in this whole soft front of the body. This area between the pelvis at the bottom and the ribs at the top. Feeling inside the breathing and noticing the way the body swells on the in-breath and subsides on the out-breath. No need to alter your breathing, just allowing it to be natural and to find its own rhythm. Every time your mind wanders, noticing this and inviting your mind back inside the belly again, and again, and again. Seeing if you can feel this movement deep inside the belly. And then allowing your awareness to drop deep down into the pelvic floor at the very base of the torso. Can you feel any movements or sensations of breathing in this area? Let it be completely effortless and receptive. Relaxing the anus, relaxing the buttocks. And with the awareness in the buttocks, allowing them to rest fully on the cushion or the chair. Then inviting your awareness into the lower back, the whole area between the buttocks and the back of the waist at the top. What can you feel inside your lower back as you breathe? Maybe some kind of broadening on the in-breath and subsiding on the out-breath. Maybe the shape of the lower back is changing between the in-breath and the out-breath. And just noticing the effect of breathing into the lower back. Because sometimes this can be very calming and soothing. If you've got any discomfort, being careful not to contract against it, but to allow the breathing to soften and to soothe the hard edges of the discomfort. Developing that skill of softening into discomfort. And now inviting awareness inside the whole of the upper back, the back of the ribs, the back of the lungs, the shoulder blades, the whole spine. And allowing breathing to express itself fully in this area. There is just as much happening in the upper back as there is in the chest. Normally, we're not very aware of this, but back breathing can be very calming and soothing. And then broaden your awareness to be aware of the whole back of the body. Lower back, upper back. whole back being cradled and rocked by breathing, soothed by breathing. And then coming through to the chest area and the front of the body. Feeling the movements of breathing in the ribs and the lungs. Feeling the sternum rising and falling. And then broadening to be aware of the whole torso. Noticing how the whole volume of the torso expands on the in-breath in all directions and subsides on the out-breath in all directions. We might think of this as 360-degree breathing. Seeing if you can just allow the breath to flow throughout the whole of the torso. And if the mind keeps wandering off, the practice is to keep noticing this and simply invite it back inside the body. Maybe you have to do this 100 times, but that is the training. Using body awareness as an anchor for the mind again and again. And then allowing awareness to pour into the shoulders. And maybe that awareness in the shoulders shows you that there's still some tightness there, some tension. And if there is, just allow that to fall away. So feeling the breath inside the shoulders, with the shoulders softening in response. And then allowing that awareness to pour down the arms. Feeling sensations in the upper arms, in the elbows, in the lower arms, the wrists, the hands, the fingers, in both arms together. How is breathing showing up in the arms? Maybe there's a very subtle sense of broadening on the in-breath and softening on the out-breath. Perhaps it's as though there's a big movement in the torso and it's spilling over and flowing down through the arms. Bringing your awareness back up through the arms, the shoulders, and up into the neck, the base of the skull, the head. If you're sitting upright, just checking the alignment of the head so it's not flopping forwards, it's not leaning backwards or dropping to one side. It's just poised on the top of the neck. Allowing awareness and breath to pour into the whole face, the forehead, the eyes, the jaw, the lips and the tongue. Allowing the breath to flow freely in and out. Inviting awareness right down through the body to come to rest in the hips. Can you feel breathing inside the hips at all? Taking awareness down into the legs. Is breathing showing up at all inside the legs? Feeling the thighs back and front, the inside of the thighs, the knees. Is there any movement there that corresponds with the breath? Feeling the lower legs, the ankles, the soles of the feet, top of the feet and the toes. And then broadening awareness to be aware of the whole body. Legs, torso, arms, head, face. Whole body being breathed. Feeling the whole body broadening a little bit in all directions on the in-breath. And subsiding a little bit towards the center from all directions on the out-breath. 360-degree breathing, effortless. The body knows how to breathe itself. But we're resting our awareness right inside this body, this fully embodied awareness of breathing, anchoring the mind. And any time that you notice that your mind has been called away, just inviting it back inside the body again. Coming back to this embodied breath, whole body breathing. As we begin to bring the practice to a close, we can move the body a little bit, perhaps stretch the shoulders a little. See if we can keep the breath soft and open, and perhaps make an intention to take this awareness of the breath in the body with us as we engage in the rest of the day. So Patricia mentioned that I call this talk tonight Enlightened Beings or Enlightened Actions. I wanted to talk about this very simple little saying that I have nevertheless found to be very helpful and encouraging. So encouraging that I wrote it on a post-it note and stuck it on my computer. It's right down here, along with all my highly secret passwords. So I see it pretty much every day. And this saying was attributed to Shunryu Suzuki, Suzuki Roshi, the great Japanese Zen teacher who is credited with bringing Buddhism to the United States. He came to the United States in the 1970s, and his teachings did a great deal to ignite interest in Buddhism. He wrote a very influential book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I used to own a copy of it once, but as all things are impermanent, it only stayed in my custody for a short time and then it moved on. I'm not too sure where it moved on to, but when I went to look for it, it was definitely gone. And with his followers, Suzuki Roshi founded the San Francisco Zen Center, which is still an active Buddhist center in San Francisco today. So what Suzuki Roshi said, and what I want us to think about tonight is, he said, strictly speaking, there are no enlightened beings. There are only enlightened actions. I first encountered this saying in Jack Kornfield's book, After the Ecstasy, The Laundry. That is a book that explores another Zen saying, the one that goes, before enlightenment, fetch wood, carry water, and after enlightenment, fetch wood, carry water. In other words, being enlightened does not give you a free pass to get out of doing all the everyday tasks in life that are waiting to be done. And in this book, which is one that has somehow managed to stay in my library. Oh no, that didn't work, did it? There it is. In this book, Jack Kornfield describes how Suzuki gave this particular teaching to a woman who asked him a question about making progress towards enlightenment. So I went online to see if there was anything more there about when Suzuki Roshi gave this teaching and what else he might have said at the time. And I discovered that there was actually a big argument going on, that had been going on for ages online, about whether Suzuki Roshi actually said this, or whether perhaps someone else said it, or whether it was completely made up. You know how these kind of online arguments go on. Some people said it wasn't Suzuki, but it was Aitken Roshi. And other people said, no, it was just something made up by someone on Facebook. And so the argument goes back and forth, but in the end, it doesn't really matter who said it, because it is still a useful thing to contemplate. So let's think about what happens when we put the emphasis on actions rather than on beings. I think for many of us, enlightenment can feel like something that's a very far distant goal, something that's almost unattainable, maybe something that will happen in the next life. And yet, when you read the stories about the Buddhist disciples who became enlightened, it doesn't seem like enlightenment was something that was almost impossible to achieve, because lots of them became enlightened. It also doesn't seem like you had to become the perfect human being before you became enlightened, which I think is somehow the way we think about it now. If you think about the way the Buddha's disciples described it, and I'm thinking particularly of the way the women disciples described it, enlightenment was more like a kind of waking up, a moment when you saw things from a different perspective. And once having seen things that way, you couldn't go back to the way you were before. this kind of resonated with me because working with different academics over the years, I worked with different schools at different times to help them devise their curriculum. And I would often ask them, you know, how did they know when they thought students were succeeding in becoming an engineer or a biologist or whatever it was? And they would often say something to me like, it's when they begin to think like an engineer or think like a biologist. So I remember the head of the School of Biology once saying to me, you know, it's about when they learn to think like a biologist and they stop thinking about individuals and they start thinking about populations of insects or animals or whatever it is, and how the environment affects those populations. And this is the hallmark of, apparently, of thinking as a biologist. Same with engineers, you know, an engineer looks at something and immediately assesses whether the structure is strong enough to stay up. And they can't help doing it. It just becomes second nature to them. So I think the Robert Thurman, who is an academic in America, I forget what he's professor of, but he's also a very well-known Buddhist teacher. And he once said that he thought that Buddhism was not so much a religion, more a curriculum, a course of study in engaged realism. So over our lifetimes, we engage in this study of, you know, what is actually real and what isn't. And at a certain point, we come to look at things in a particular way of looking at them. Is this going to be for the benefit, for my long-term benefit and happiness? Is it going to be for the long-term benefit and happiness of others? Does this enable me to see more clearly, or does it make me more deluded? And when we reach that point, then we somehow have become more enlightened than not. Buddhism certainly has had its share of teachers who failed to live up to our expectations. Some teachers who were very highly regarded for their understanding of the Buddha's teachings, people like Chogyam Trungpa or Ajahn Chah, who gave excellent teachings and who wrote really illuminating books, did not always behave like enlightened beings. Jack Kornfield talks about how when he was a young monk, he was in a monastery in Thailand, and Ajahn Chah was his abbot and his teacher. And at one point he complained to Ajahn Chah that Ajahn Chah, didn't always act as though he were completely enlightened. Pretty cheeky, I thought, but anyway. And Ajahn Chah replied, just as well for you, Jack, because if I did, you would still be imagining that you could find the Buddha outside yourself, and he is not there. So it was, you know, don't look up to me as the perfect embodiment of what the Buddha taught. Look for what's possible within yourself. Apparently, there's a Tibetan saying that your guru should live at least 3 valleys away. Several days of travel up and down and over the ridges and the valleys. In other words, you shouldn't get to see them very often. At this distance, they can be inspiring, and you really appreciate their teaching when you don't get to hear it very often. But living next door to them might be disillusioning. And in a world of impermanence, how can an enlightened being exist? We know that all beings are in a state of flux, of flow, of change. Where's the stable part, the everlasting part of us that's permanently enlightened? I was once contacted by a Buddhist group from another state who were seeking assistance for their teacher. It was at the time when we were trying to get the beginnings of a Zen hospice established, which we never actually managed to do, but we tried. And so they thought that we might be able to help them. Their teacher was an ordained monk. I think he was from Burma, and his followers held him in very high regard. And he'd served the local Buddhist community very faithfully for many years, but now he was old and he was becoming demented and he was unable to look after himself. If he'd been enlightened when he was at the height of his powers, was he still enlightened when his powers were failing? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's something to think about. The last thing we want to do is to cling on to an idea of ourselves as on the road to enlightenment or almost enlightened. You may laugh at the idea, but I have actually met people who've proudly told me what level of enlightenment they've achieved so far and how they were not, far off the ultimate end. And this is really, it's just another form of self-building and clinging. Enlightenment is not something that we get or something that we become. It manifests in us when we've created and developed the right conditions for it to arise. And Suzuki Roshi points us towards a great truth, that enlightenment is only recognizable in our actions, in the choices that we make, in those moments when we act out of kindness and wisdom and freedom. And you may find it, as I do, encouraging to reflect on the fact that not every action is going to be an enlightened one. There's bound to be many times when we act unwisely or speak harshly, react with anger, waste precious resources. But amongst all of this run-of-the-mill thoughtless behaviour, there are also times when everyday people like you and I, who would never claim to be enlightened beings, still we sometimes do something that turns out to be a good thing to do. We might be generous to those in need. We step in to diffuse a difficult situation and we do it skillfully. We advocate for those who are not being heard. We take on the job that needs doing and we do it well. And when the action is past and we can think back on what happened, we might think, actually, that worked out pretty well. Maybe that was kind of like an enlightened action. When I was preparing this talk, I thought we probably needed some kind of working definition of what an enlightened action might look like. And because I'd been looking up Suzuki Roshi to see what else he'd said about it, I found myself on various American Zen sites. And my goodness, there's some rubbish on some of these discussion boards as these American Zen practitioners try to impress each other with how cool they are. This is just one example. Someone called Jeffrey says, in response to a question about what enlightened activity might mean, he says, I think because all phenomena are empty, you cannot sew them up with a definition, and that is part of it. I guess you could say enlightened activity comes from undistorted ultimate bodhicitta. This is what samatha vipassana is uncovering. And someone calls Genkaku replies, sneeze once and you'll get the drift. If you don't get the drift, sneeze again and keep up your good practice. So I gave up the Zen practitioners at that point. But then there was a Tibetan Rinpoche who had just published a whole book on enlightenment. And I didn't go as far as reading the book. I read the bits that appear on the back cover and the inside of the front cover. And he said, supreme enlightened activity involves planting the seed of liberation in another's being by initiating him or her into a mandala, using mantras which are embraced by extraordinary methods and knowledge. And it just made me very glad that I had found my way to the Theravadan tradition, where at least I have a chance of understanding what's going on. So let's go with a really simple definition of enlightened activity, the one that I dreamed up myself. That it's an action that contributes to the well-being and happiness of a living being. That living being might be you yourself. It might be one or more other living beings. It might be whole communities. So if the action that you chose turns out to have been a wise and helpful thing to do, and you did it free from any clinging to ideas about how you might appear to others or what reward you might get, then I think we could consider that enlightened activity. So how do enlightened activities, just enlightened actions, how do they just arise? In order for that to happen, we need to cultivate the ground, nourish the plants, pull out the weeds. That is, we need to develop and strengthen our inclinations of kindness to others. And we do that through things like our loving kindness practice. And we need to disengage from expectations that are common in our society, that we would only do something when there's some kind of reward attached. We practice on small acts of kindness and generosity. And we hope that by coming together like this, listening to the Dharma, discussing and meditating together, we grow in wisdom and compassion. I think we should also note that it's actions and not thoughts about actions that we're concerned about. I remember a few weeks ago, Frank was concerned that he'd been not able to control his thoughts. Thoughts had been going all over the place and they were not particularly spiritual ones. And he said, I don't know what this means about his future enlightenment. But if you've been meditating for a while, you know that thoughts can be about anything at all. A bored brain can come up with the most outrageous, ridiculous ideas, just purely for its own entertainment value, just in the hope that you'll stop meditating and do something more interesting. Part of you knows that you're not going to take those thoughts seriously, let alone act on them. It's actions that we're actually looking at here. So let's just finish up with Jack Kornfield's actual account of how Suzuki Roshi came to say these words. Jack says, for Zen Master Suzuki Roshi, enlightenment was expressed by being just where you are. He says, and I don't know if he was actually here present at this or not, but anyway, he thinks it happened. A woman told Suzuki Roshi that she found it difficult to mix her Zen practice with the demands of being a householder. Hands up if that applies to you. She said, I feel I'm trying to climb a ladder, but for every step upward, I slip backwards 2 steps. And Suzuki Roshi said to her, forget the ladder. He said, when you wake up, that is when you are enlightened, everything is right here on the ground. He explained how the desire to gain anything, that is the desire that she's talking about to climb the ladder, means you miss the reality of the present moment. Now, he said, when you realize the truth that everything changes and you find your composure in it, and what he means by that is that you're okay with it. You know everything is going to change and you're okay with that. You can live with it. Then he said, you find yourself in nirvana. And when she asked more about enlightenment, Suzuki Roshi, who himself never claimed to be enlightened, he said, strictly speaking, there are no enlightened beings. There's only enlightened activity. So if you think you're enlightened, that is not it. Enlightened cannot be helped by anyone. The goal is to let go of being someone special and meet each moment with beginner's mind. So that's as much as I have prepared, but very happy to discuss and talk and try and answer any questions that you might have. Just got a message of encouragement from Bante. I thought for a minute he was going to tell me you've got it all wrong. But he didn't.
Hello, everyone. My name's Harry. Thank you, Sue, for the wonderful talk and for your time and generosity of presenting. But I really enjoyed the meditation and your thoughts then, your reflections. I find that very encouraging because I think for me, I've often felt quite turned off, or I'm never going to achieve enlightenment because I'm a dad, I work, I don't have any time to practice, you know, I'm never going to get there, or it's going to take lifetimes. And I think for me, that's very helpful to know, because I have tried to practice the Dharma and to live with kindness and loving compassion and do that. And certainly when I've raised my children, I've tried to bring that kind of Buddhist framework to it. So, and the other thing too, I do believe I was at university and I was Catholic at that stage. And, you know, in the time, I'm very, very Catholic, and this wonderful professor there, she's an atheist. And so that my worldview at the time was she's going to hell. And I thought, there is no way Jane Adamson is going to hell. She's one of the most gorgeous people I've ever met. She's kind, she's compassionate, she's loving, she takes care of all the students, she's generous, she's thoughtful. I just thought, I don't believe that. I think it's all about actions. And from that moment, probably for me, I don't mind what you profess. If you're Jewish, who cares what you profess? To me, it's none of my business, but to me, it just all comes down to actions. So, but thank you for helping me to reframe, because I've often felt quite discouraged because some of my mates have got more time to practice and read and study and things. And I thought, I'm never going to get there, but maybe all I need to do is just keep trying to practice enlightened actions in the moment.
Yes. And maybe we can manage, you know, quite a few of them in this life. That's why I find it encouraging that I think we can all manage a few enlightened actions. We may not, you know, get to be permanently enlightened beings all the time, but then we're not going to get to be permanently anything, really. There is no such thing as permanence when it comes to human beings. Thanks, Harry.
Yes, I want to agree with Harry. Thanks, Sue, for very, again, accessible talk and approach to these topics that I think for me can sometimes get a bit buried in the cleverness or the maybe it's just other people's attempt to come to terms with difficult concepts, but I did find that very accessible and encouraging, as Harry was saying, that it is about what we do on a daily basis, and we can't sort of rest on our laurels. We can't hang on to anything really, and that, I think, just makes me want to, I guess, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, when conditions are right, things manifest, and when conditions stop being right, I don't think there's a word demanifest, but they cease to be in this form. Yeah. And so I think that just says, just keep working and ploughing the ground for the conditions for enlightened activity and beneficial activity, both for myself and for others to arise. Yeah. So thank you.
I thought of you, Frank, a few nights ago when my neighbours downstairs had their bathroom stripped out and a new bathroom put in. And they were, very apologetic beforehand and said, we really hope this doesn't create a lot of noise and inconvenience for you. And I said, oh no, I'm sure we can put up with whatever it is for a few days. Well, the noise, there was a bit of noise and it wasn't too bad. But what was truly terrible was the night when they painted the walls with the new waterproofing solution. And then the neighbours had moved out during this whole process. And the builder, of course, went home, and dreadful toxic fumes floated up through the building all night long. And I got up and put, the full selection of COVID masks. So we all put on masks and we shut all the windows that we could find, and it didn't make the least bit of difference. It was coming up through the plumbing. And I kept thinking, this is probably, incredibly toxic and we'll all die. And it is incredibly toxic. That proved to be absolutely right. And I thought the worst thoughts about this builder. I thought of dreadful things that I could do to him and how I could ruin his business and whatever. And the next morning, I went down there and I said, I have a bit of a problem with the fumes. And he turned out to be the loveliest man. He was not very old. And he said, oh, I know the fumes are terrible. And I'm really, really sorry. There's a better way of doing this, but it's more expensive. And I was afraid that if I, went the more expensive route, I wouldn't get the job. And I really needed the job. So I ended up being on his side. And he did his best to alleviate the fumes. And so far, I seem to have survived. Although long term, who knows? But it was when I was thinking about, it's just as well we're not held accountable for the thoughts and only for the actions. Because, I could have, I had terrible thoughts about things I might do to him. But in fact, once we talked, I didn't do any of them. So, yes, it's what you put into action that matters.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Sue. Thank you. Right, so much. Yes. Yes. If I may say a few things about enlightenment. In 1961, I was drafted into the Hungarian army for 2 years. It was compulsory. And I was already married. And in a very cold February morning, I received a small parcel from my young wife. She was 19-year-old. Food in it. All my favorite cakes and some sausage, etc. In my group, there were and another 20 kids, soldiers. And I was so happy and looked around. Now, if I present any of them with some of my cakes, I won't have anything left for me because these 20 hungry kids will eat it all. So I ate it all by myself. I wasn't a Buddhist then, you know. And I never forgot that.
You've
And
been carrying this weight of
so,
poor decision making all of these years, Frank.
and then I said to myself, I have to be a better human being. So whenever I sit down to eat, even with my wife, I ask her if I can share some of my food with her. And she leave me alone. You know, I cook, did I eat what I want? But it became a cost. So I became a pastry cook, baker. And when I started life in Sydney in 1966, I had many older Hungarians that were not in poverty because Australian pensions, but I started two charity organizations. And in the last 10 years, I managed to scrape together $14,000 for the Ukrainian Hungarians, especially in the past few, now that the war is going on. $14,000 through St. George. I have all the receipts, etc. And many, many Sundays, I start the poetry afternoon and give dinner, and the entry fee is $30. I give a big meal, and the leftover goes to the war. So
Well
I
done,
thought
Frank.
it's an enlightened action because it takes me days to cook scones and things like that. And it's all my money. And the materials are went up since we have this new government and the inflation, etc. Today in the park, there was a stick on the grass, picked it up, put it to the rubbish because the guy who cuts the grass might damage his machine. Little things, becoming a good human being. Actions without the eye, without expectation.
Yeah.
Just do something good. And my wife keeps telling me of all the neighbors laugh about you because you pick up all their rubbish.
I bet they don't laugh. I bet they're really grateful to you.
They think you're a fool. Of course, I just laugh and tell myself, the ego, the I, there's nowhere to get hurt or upset. So I just do little things, whatever I can.
Yeah.
So enlightenment.
Thank you, Frank. Those were really good examples. And yes. Okay. Okay, if we don't have any other questions or comments, I'll hand back to Patricia. Thanks. And Meredith's back. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you for everyone for joining us tonight. And a big shout out there to Bhante, and thank you to Meredith. So
I would just like to pass on to Frank that Bhante has said in the chat, your fabulous strudel is a taste of enlightenment, Frank.
Thank you.
And that's true, Frank.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you.
Can I just say thank you very much to Meredith for all the work that she's done for such a long time in organising the teaching schedule and everything. She's done a great job. So sadhu, sadhu, sadhu to you, Meredith.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu. Sadhu.
And thank you to everyone for coming along tonight. It was a wonderful talk.
Thank you, Bhante.
Indeed. And
And
couldn't we all do with a piece of that strudel right now?
Oh, absolutely. Frank's strudel, Frank's strudel is the best strudel.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
And,
real Hungarian strudel.
Okay, well, yes, again, what can one say about thank you, and really a very encouraging and, as I say, accessible talk and approach to Dharma. So thank you, Sue, very much.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you, Sue.
Good to
Yeah,
see you all.
it's great
Thank
talk,
you,
Sue.
Sue.